So this quick demo is going to be about intentional focus for our intentional focus exercise. And to do it, we wanted to take a picture of something in focus and then play with taking that same picture or a version of that picture out of focus. And the goal is to try to be more interested and visually engaged in the out of focus version than the in focus version. And thus using focus as an intentional creative tool. When you have an SLR, you're able to shift to manual focus and override automatic focus. And in that way, you can do lots of different steps of focus. So here we have 2 different steps. And in order to get the most focal range, in order to get something this blurry, you have to zoom in with your lens on your subject as well. So we're going to take our pictures, our exposures, off of our memory cards. And we talked about other ways that we could get intentionally blurry focus from our pictures. One is that we can focus lock on something up close. So I'll open these all up. And I'm just going to open them with preview. So I have a little film strip, move them off to here so I can see the desktop. So I have an in-focus picture there, and then using manual focus, I can simply take the focus away progressively until it doesn't look like any particular face. More like just an icon of a face, and the colors start to blend together. But what if I have a point and shoot camera and I'm not able to have that focus ring? Well, what I can do is first focus lock on something really close and fairly zoomed in to force the aperture of my camera open. So I focus locked on the corner of this monitor about 8 inches or so away from my lens. And then I held that focus lock down and carried that amount of focus and that aperture over and took the shot. And I actually like this one more than I like this one. So that has some potential. So 2 might be this one and this one. Another is bright colors are really fun to play with in terms of focus. And if you don't want to do the focus lock game, which I did here and got this, which is fun, you can also just leave your autofocus on and not worry about where it focus locks so much, but have a longer shutter speed and move your camera so that you get motion blur. So there's an example, or this one in focus, kind of in focus. It's a little motion blurred, but this is really motion blurred. And you can get some nice colors that way. Nice movement. So I'm pretty fond of this one right here. And I can say this was the in-focus picture. This is the out-of-focus picture of that same thing. This one's kind of fun too.
So we just need 2, right?
You just need 2. And it doesn't matter how you got it out of focus. All right, so now we're going to open those both in Photoshop. So I think I'll play with these 2 this semester. So that's my in-focus shot, and this is my out-of-focus shot. Very different, right? And I would say if I had to have one of these on my wall, I'd want it to be this one. Just more visually interesting. And that's not your fault at all, Ruth. But I'm going to open those both in Photoshop.
Does it have to be a person or an object?
No, it can be anything. Yeah, like I did the fire alarm on the wall. Just anything you think is visually interesting once it's out of focus. It's fun to do this with goldfish, especially colorful fish in an aquarium. All right, so I have both of them open. So that I can see them both at the same time, I'm going to go to Window, Arrange, Float All in Windows. Then I can put them side by side. Whoops. Switch it up. Window, Arrange, Float All in Windows. Photoshop tries to outsmart you sometimes and nest them even when you don't want them to. Okay, now I want to see what Photoshop tools there are to take focus away. And actually, just to show you the difference, I think I might also open up this one, because this is a more standard focus pull without the movement. So I'll actually have 3 examples here just so you can see the difference between all of them. See, pretty big difference between a motion blur and just a regular focus pull. All right. And it's interesting how focus can bend the light. So it increases the white light from the windows, and that bites into the head and bites into the skin. And then it increases the light of this jacket, and that kind of bites into the arm. Now what we're going to try to do is see how Photoshop can take focus away. And so going on to my in-focus exposure, I'm first going to make a duplicate, so Command-J. So I have a copy layer. And then on that layer, I'm going to go up to Filter and Blur. And a tool, pretty much the only filter we'll ever think of using is under Blur. And we're going to learn how to use Gaussian blur today, and later we'll learn how to use lens blur, which fakes aperture effects. But Gaussian blur basically takes every pixel and then spreads it out as far as you want to mix with the other pixels, like ripples in a pond. And see how it does. It's not going to do the same that you can do optically with your lens, but see how close you can get to getting them to match using Photoshop tools. And so the difference is, since this is just done with the pixels, this doesn't let the light bite into other areas like a lens does. All it does is treat all of them equally. So each pixel kind of blurs across each other pixel. So what we can see is that Photoshop can do a good job pixel by pixel, taking that individual sharp pixel grid and taking focus away from it. But it can't match the depth kind of optical effects that our lens can when we play with different focus pools, either with manual focus or by tricking our camera with focus lock. Now, can Photoshop do this kind of thing, a motion blur? Well, let's see. You don't need to do this unless you have a motion blur effect. But I'm going to make another duplicate of my background layer. Then I'm going to go to Filter, Blur, and I'm going to click on Motion Blur. And here, this is just like Gaussian blur, except you can set the angle at which the blur happens. And so my angle is just slightly up like that. And it's pretty blurry. Maybe about like that. Maybe an angle of about 3. Now the problem with this motion blur is it just simply spreads it from the middle, right? Which is a little different than just blurring the pixels as they are. But there would be no way with the camera, with Photoshop, that I can match what I got here with the camera, like all these trails of light with this kind of clear momentum. But this can give me the effect if I want to try to show it that motion blur effect. And it can be a useful tool. Okay, now we're going to play with your favorite out of focus exposure. And what we're going to try to do is make it back in focus. So I've taken this shot. I want it to look like this shot. Let's make a duplicate of it. Command J. Then I go to Filter, and I go to Sharpen. And probably the best tool for this is Smart Sharpen. That gives me the most options. Okay, and now I'm basically, just like I did with Gaussian blur, I'm going to set the radius and the amount. I'm going to kind of push everything to its utmost, and I want it to remove Gaussian blur. Especially because my photo is really, really out of focus. And you'll see in the preview what it does. I say okay. And what we're hoping for is that we can bring this photo back into focus and see all of this detail. But can that happen? We see it in spy movies and surveillance, like CIA depictions all the time. We got to clean up that resolution and that security footage. Put the algorithm in. Tell me when you have a face. Right? But this is the best the computer can do. So let's see if we can recognize the person. No. And that's because the computer cannot make up information it doesn't have. Right? It can only work with the pixels we give it. So when we tell the computer to sharpen, all it can do is take each individual pixel and make it more contrasted with the pixels that are next to it. So you end up getting these very noisy, very grainy looking images, which are nice. They're almost like pointillist paintings. But it is not at all the same thing as having something that's sharp and in focus. So that's why being able to control your exposures is really important, no matter how powerful our tools are in editing. But Photoshop clearly does a better job taking focus away than it does trying to add focus back in. So that's the first lesson. Okay, since we are playing with filters, what I'd like you to do now is to take your out of focus picture, which we made more artistic, right? And it can be whatever out of focus picture you want. I might play with this one because I like it. Make a duplicate of it. And now we're going to play with some other filters. I'm going to walk you through a few of them. If we blur all the way, basically, so if we say blur, Gaussian blur, and we take it all the way to the edge, it will basically become one color. And we can get beautiful gradations this way. But that's just blurring out every pixel to its maximum, like pretty much across the whole picture. So that's one thing you can play with. But other filters that are a lot of fun are under Stylize. And basically an easy way to get access to a lot of these is under the Filter Gallery. So if you just go to Filter Gallery, you can take the picture that you're playing with and you can apply different effects to it. But this, of course, takes it out of the realm of photography. This is getting more into digital art. The problem with filters is that these are overlays and algorithms that have been written for you to achieve a certain effect. It's not something you have a whole lot of control of. One of my favorites is this one, Plastic Wrap, because it will kind of force a texture into it as though it's wrapped in plastic. And you can actually add texture to almost anything by using it, but it doesn't mean you can control that texture. Right? But that looks kind of interesting. It looks like it's actually paint. So now's your chance to kind of play with some of these with the goal of trying to find an art picture that you like even more. So if I like this, I can save that as my artistic version.